How do experts go about solving their biggest problems? More than anything else, by asking the right question. Asking the right question allowed science to discover the foundations for physics, biology, and chemistry. Let's see if we can do the same thing for the science of public interest activism. As explained in the previous film, these are the world's biggest problems. Once you know how severe the unsolved problems are, the list says one thing loud and clear. Democracy is in crisis. Activists have been able to solve the problems on the left, but not the problems on the right. Why is that? Why is activism able to solve some problems and not others? Thwink.org has been working on an answer to that question since 2001. After 7 years of analysis, we came to the conclusion that the answer to the question is surprisingly simple. It's because popular solutions are not designed to resolve root causes. Seeing the problem this way requires a new way of thinking, a new mindset. Activists don't currently think in terms of root causes or how to find them, which requires root cause analysis. But all problems arise from their root causes. Every time you engage in problem solving, you are doing root cause analysis, whether you use the term root cause or not. Root cause analysis offers two enormous advantages that I get pretty excited about. They're huge. The first advantage is you can now analytically find and resolve root causes instead of doing that intuitively. This moves your work from groping around in the dark with trial and error, which doesn't exactly work, to the steady reliability of science. While some intuition is still required, 90% of science is plodding along with concrete analysis, step by little step. The second advantage is the real payoff. Once you start using root cause analysis, you're using a formal process to solve problems. The process can be written down, easily learned, and uniformly applied by everyone who uses it. That process can now be continuously improved until it's good enough to solve your problems. This is big. If you're working on an insanely difficult problem that's defied all attempts at solution, continuous process improvement makes the difference between failure and success. Just ask the millions of business managers who've been doing exactly that for over 200 years. And ask the scientists who've been improving the scientific method ever since it was invented over 1,000 years ago. A new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move toward higher levels. Albert Einstein. A root cause is the deepest cause in a causal chain that can be resolved. When a mechanic checks out your car to see why it won't start, he's looking for the root cause. When a doctor tries to diagnose why a patient is sick, She's looking for the root causes. If the doctor can't find the root cause of someone's illness, she'll be unable to solve the problem. That's why activists can't solve the unsolved problems. The solved problems were relatively easy. They were so simple, the root causes were obvious, even though activists never used that term. By contrast, the unsolved problems are so diabolically complex that the root causes are impossible to find. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil for one who is striking at the root. Henry David Thoreau. Activists have been hacking at the branches of evil by trying one solution after another in a long series of trial and error and error and error. Where's the pattern? There is none. It's a giant hodgepodge of intuitive solutions with no clear organization because of no real analysis. The sad truth is that nothing worked because no one was striking at the root. None of the solutions were designed to solve a specific root cause. So every brick in the wall of that tower of solutions mysteriously failed. Or it had much less than the intended effect. It's a depressing, frustrating situation to be in. But that can change if activists begin using the powerful business tool of root cause analysis. Root cause analysis is a process for finding and resolving the root causes of a problem. It works on all types of problems because all problems arise from their root causes. There's a wealth of knowledge out there on how to apply a root cause analysis because it works so extraordinarily well on all types of problems. In fact, root cause analysis works so well that industry uses it over 10,000 times a day. Entire industries like auto manufacturing, high-tech electronics, and pharmaceuticals depend on root cause analysis to solve their problems. Every time you drive your car or take a prescription drug, your life depends on root cause analysis. There's no doubt root cause analysis works, but how are we going to use that tool to solve the unsolved problems? By adapting the tool to fit social problems.
The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Richard Feynman.
One way scientists avoid fooling themselves is by drawing diagrams. A good diagram shows how the essential forces of a problem interact, so that the problem becomes understandable and therefore predictable. Feynman diagrams show how particles interact to form new particles. Newtonian force diagrams show how objects of any kind move according to Newton's laws of motion. But these diagrams apply only to physical forces. What we need is a diagram for social forces. How do independent social agents like people, politicians, corporations, and countries interact? What are the key forces involved? How can we show those forces in a simple diagram? Social forces can be represented in a social force diagram. The whole idea is that social problems are caused by social forces. On difficult problems, these forces are normally invisible, like gravity. Sir Isaac Newton made the physical force of gravity visible in a logical sense with Newtonian diagrams. We can do the same for social forces with social force diagrams. All problems arise from their root causes, so that's where we start. The first social force we need to diagram is root cause forces. Symptoms are caused by intermediate causes, which in turn are caused by root causes. For example, suppose your car won't start. Whoa, Nellie, that's not going to work. There are better ways of solving the problem than pulling your car down the road. Root cause analysis to the rescue. The symptoms are the car won't start. The intermediate cause is a dead battery. But what's the root cause? You really can't tell without further examination of the system. Suppose investigation found a broken fan belt. The belt also runs the alternator, so that's the root cause, because it eliminates the symptoms and is a fairly permanent solution. Replace the belt, charge up the battery, and your problem is solved. What we've just drawn is a causal chain. That's how you analyze problems with root cause analysis. You start at the symptoms and keep asking, why does this occur, until you find one or more root causes. This is a technical problem. The system was easy to analyze and find the root cause. By contrast, social problems are totally different. Huge systemic problems like climate change, poverty, and discrimination are so complex that their root causes are as impossibly hard to find as a tiny little needle at the bottom of the ocean. Difficult social problems have two layers: the superficial layer, which is easy to see, and the fundamental layer, which is hard to see. Thinking in terms of layers lets us see that difficult social problems have three main types of social forces. The first type is root cause forces. The second is superficial solution forces. And the third type is fundamental solution forces. Now we can see why popular solutions to the unsolved problems are not working. They're superficial solutions attempting in vain to somehow resolve the intermediate causes. That's like insisting that the real cause of why your car won't start is a dead battery. Charge up the battery and the car runs, but only for a little while. All because you didn't take the time or have the right tools to dig deeper to the fundamental layer where the root cause was. There's one more thing to explain. Social problems differ radically from technical problems because you're dealing with people instead of parts. After a social problem is solved at the root cause level, the system undergoes a mode change. A properly engineered root cause solution changes the feedback loop structure of the system so as to make the mode change fairly permanent. This can be represented by the new root cause forces. Let's get back to the big picture. Traditional activism has no concept of root cause analysis, so all it can see is the superficial layer. The rest is hidden in the fog of complexity. But with root cause analysis, we can slice through that fog and reveal the fundamental layer. Activists are blind to the existence of the fundamental layer. If you can't see the fundamental layer with its root causes, it's impossible to solve a difficult social problem unless you know how to change the laws of physics. This blindness explains why activism is able to solve some problems and not others. This is a powerful insight, and I hope you can share it with others. That's basically how social force diagrams work. It's a powerful but simple tool for applying root cause analysis to difficult social problems. How powerful? Well, let's go ahead and apply the tool to one of the biggest problems in history. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana. The previous film explained the three main types of government. First came the tribal chiefs period during the hunter-gatherer phase. That was followed by the authoritarian ruler period, where rulers like these had key characteristics. We really don't want to go back to this period because life was miserable, unless you were a member of the ruling class. Next came modern democracy, where the quality of life for all soared to record heights. But with the rise, recently, of hate-based authoritarians like Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, history is now running backward. Democracy is reverting to authoritarianism. The authoritarian ruler period could also be called the too many Trumps period. There were too many Trumps with too much money and too much power. The main problem with the authoritarian ruler period was high economic inequality. The people at the top, the ruling class, the equivalent of today's billionaires, lived lives of royal luxury. Everyone else suffered from a life of unrelenting toil and near starvation, depending on their class. Those at the very bottom, the slaves, had it even worse. Let's build a social force diagram for the authoritarian ruler problem. The symptom of the problem was a low median quality of life, while the rulers were much better off. Why were most people so poor compared to their rulers? The cause was obvious. It's because they had mostly bad rulers. We didn't do too well trying to solve the authoritarian ruler problem. The only way to solve it was to forcibly replace a bad ruler with a good one. Various solutions were used to do that, like revolution, uprising, assassination, and coups. But these solutions didn't work all that well because they were superficial solutions, also known as symptomatic solutions. The solutions only worked for a short time or a small amount if they worked at all. In retrospect, it's easy to see why these solutions didn't work permanently. There was no conception of the fundamental layer of the problem. People were blind to the idea that it was possible to dig deeper and find the root cause of the problem. The result is millions of people suffered under the greed and tyranny of authoritarians for 10,000 years. Pioneering activists eventually solved the problem by accidentally discovering the root cause. The root cause was that there was no easy way to replace a bad ruler with a good one. There were hard ways, like revolutions, but there were no easy ways to replace bad rulers quickly without shocking the system. Give me a place to stand, and I can move the world. Archimedes, inventor of the law of levers. Let's apply the principle of leverage. In systems thinking, a leverage point is a place in a system structure where a solution element can be applied. It's a low leverage point if a small amount of change force causes a small change or no change in system behavior. It's a high leverage point if a small amount of change causes a large change in system behavior. The reason the superficial solutions didn't work is they pushed on a low leverage point. That failed because superficial solutions can never exert more force on the intermediate causes than the root causes can. The diagram represents this by the relative size of the arrows. That a superficial solution force can never resolve a root cause is the key insight of social force diagrams. Once the root cause of the authoritarian ruler problem was discovered, it became possible to push on a high leverage point. This was the concept that people have rights. Therefore, people must have power over rulers. The high leverage point was identified in a big way in 1215 when the barons of England forced King John to sign the Magna Carta. For the first time, the king's subjects had rights the king must respect. After 5 centuries of experimentation, a solution for pushing on the high leverage point was found in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. The fundamental solution was modern democracy, whose essence is the voter feedback loop. There's one more thing to explain. Fundamental solutions change a system's behavior by changing the feedback loop structure of the system. The superficial solutions, like revolutions, only changed the ruler. But the fundamental solution changed the system by adding the voter feedback loop. This caused a somewhat permanent mode change. After that, the new root cause forces worked to keep the system in a new equilibrium. It's a simple diagram, but it says so much. To me, it says that we can learn from the past. We can learn how historic problems like this one were solved at the root cause level by what amounted to trial and error. We can then apply that knowledge to speed up solving similar problems today by several orders of magnitude, because we will be using the right tools instead of trial and error. That is exactly what it will take to solve the democracy in crisis problem. We live in a structured universe. At the heart of physics sits the structure provided by the 3 laws of motion and the universal law of gravity. Those laws control every motion in the universe. Biology has the structure of the evolutionary algorithm and DNA, which control the behavior of all living things. And chemistry has the beautifully structured periodic table, which controls the behavior of the elements. Our universe would be chaos without all that structure. So why should there not be a universal structure at the heart of all social systems? What if there was a simple structure that controlled all difficult social problems? We theorize that such a structure exists. It has always existed, but activists have been unable to see it because they are blindfolded. Activists can't see what they need to see because they're not using the right tools. We can't say we know exactly what the complete structure is, but we do have a starting point. That starting point begins with the concept of the right tools. Activists are where astronomers were before they used telescopes. Activists lack the right tools. Without the right tools, public interest activists are having quite a bit of trouble seeing the fundamental layer of the unsolved problems, where the root causes lie. That can change. The engineers at Thwink.org have a modest hypothesis. Every field of science needs a foundation. Given that all problems arise from their root causes, we feel that social force diagrams, or something like them, must be part of that foundation. But that's not enough. Something more is needed. What should guide our thinking as we build social force diagrams? That can be done with the 6 laws of root cause analysis. But even that's not enough for the humongously difficult problems activists face. We need a tool to guide everything we do. We need a little bird sitting on our shoulders singing softly in our ears, telling us what to do at every fork in the long road to solving social problems. That can be done with something like the system improvement process. It's not a perfect foundation, but it seems fully capable of serving as a starting point because it provides the same basic things that made the difference for every field of modern science after the scientific revolution. It provides a sufficiently complete framework for defining how to go about solving the central problems in your field. The 6 laws provide the scientific rationale behind social force diagrams and the system improvement process. We're not saying these laws are cast in stone and will never change. More could be included. But we want to keep the core foundation as focused and simple as possible. These 6 laws seem to be the minimum needed to correctly analyze difficult large-scale social problems with root cause analysis. Here's how the laws work. We know from Newton's 3rd law that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. All effects have a cause, and all causes have an effect. Therefore, all problems arise from their root causes. That's the first law. Here's how it applies to causal chains. We know from Newton's 3rd law that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The first ball is the action, and the outgoing ball is the reaction. The 5 balls represent a causal chain. The shortest possible causal chain is 2 balls. Cause and effect, also known as root cause and symptom. When a problem only has two links in the causal chain, root cause and symptom, it's generally easy to diagnose. But if it gets more complex, you have three links in the chain: root cause, intermediate cause, and symptoms. So it gets a little harder to figure out what's causing a problem like that. The more complex the problem, the more links you have in the chain. Now we have two balls in the middle, two intermediate causes. When we add a fifth link to the chain, we have three intermediate causes. So that's three intermediate causes between root cause and symptom. Now imagine 5,000 balls. That is the complexity of the large-scale, difficult social problems that we face today. Some problems are so complex, they really do have 5,000 steel balls, like this one. There's no need to model so much detail. All we need to model is what matters, the three main forces. First, we need to model the root cause forces, signified by the letter R, so we can see what's causing the problem. We also need to model the superficial solution forces, so we can understand why present solutions are failing. Most important of all, we need to model the fundamental solution forces, so we can determine exactly how to solve the problem. We can't guess. We need to know exactly where on the structure of the system our solutions need to push to solve the problem. The second law tells us that superficial solutions fail because S is less than R. That equation is shown right here. Force S is always less than force R because root causes exert much more force on intermediate causes than superficial solutions ever can. For example, let's return to the authoritarian ruler problem. The superficial solution of revolutions didn't work because it was a weaker force than the root cause force. Revolutions are to be avoided at all costs because they're so destructive and unpredictable. Even if they work, most of the time the new good ruler goes bad or is eventually succeeded by another bad ruler. Superficial solutions don't work because force S is less than force R. This is a huge insight. If solutions to a difficult social problem are failing, it's usually because S is less than R, or less often because the problem is unsolvable, as presently defined. The third law says that fundamental solutions succeed because F is greater than R. That's why the invention of modern democracy worked. The force created by the voter feedback loop was so much greater than the root cause force that it tipped the system into a mode change and solved the problem because F was greater than R. This is pretty exciting stuff. We've boiled the core of root cause analysis down to two simple equations. S is less than R and F is greater than R. I think that's amazing. It's going to help a lot of people. I have a dream, and I hope by the end of this film it's your dream too. Someday, these are going to be known as the two little equations that changed the world of activism, just like so many other equations changed the world of science. How can you tell if you've found a case where F is greater than R? This occurs in stages. First, you logically show that f is greater than r with social force diagrams. As your analysis proceeds, you build a simulation model to determine how the problem's key feedback loops really work. Next, solution candidates are tested with field experiments, like in a small town with treatment and control groups. Finally, your very best solution candidates are tested with pilot programs. Let's take a look at an example of Step 2. A feedback loop simulation model allows us to logically test the analysis in a much more accurate way than the human mind alone could ever hope to do. Simulation models are an excellent tool for turning complexity into simplicity. This is an actual model from the analysis. The two main feedback loops are here and here. The root cause of the change resistance subproblem is here. We found one low leverage point and two higher leverage points here and here. Let's go ahead and run the model. The output graph over here starts up and then over time goes into a long-term equilibrium. The red line represents the number of supporters of special interest politicians, while the green line represents supporters of politicians who promote the common good. Right now, the world's political systems are in a rather bad equilibrium because most of the time the special interests, notably large for-profit corporations and the rich, are winning. The system is biased against solving common good problems. It's a systemic problem. So how can we resolve the root cause and make the green line go higher than the red line? Well, actually, it's the gray line we want to be watching because that's the percent of total supporters standing for the common good. We want the gray line to go high. Which of these two high leverage points has the greater leverage? Suppose we go ahead and push on this one and raise it from 20% to 80%. Watch the graph. It definitely has an effect. The gray line tops out at about 70%. That's only a partial solution because about 30% of the time the bad guys would be in control of the system. These aren't exact numbers, 30% and 70%, but they approximate how the real world behaves. Now what happens when we push on the other high leverage point? General ability to detect political deception, better known as truth literacy. Let's first set the model back to where it was. Now let's push on this high leverage point. Once again, the gray line goes up, but it goes a lot further. And it tops out not at 70%, but at 100%. Better yet, all the supporters of the race to the bottom, special interests, eventually go to zero, which means they go extinct. So the root cause is totally resolved. If you study the overall structure of the model, the high leverage point tells us exactly what our solutions must be designed to do. We don't have to guess anymore. Instead, the effect of solutions on the system becomes predictable because we're using the right tools. How do we know if a tough social problem is solvable or not? That takes us to the fourth law. If analysis shows no f is greater than r exists, then the problem is unsolvable. For thousands of years, it looked like the authoritarian ruler problem was unsolvable. Revolutions didn't work for long. It didn't take long for a good ruler to go bad or for bad rulers to get back into power, and then another revolution was needed. That's why there were so many revolutions in history. the problem looked unsolvable because activists couldn't find a solution where F was greater than R. But in retrospect, we know the problem was solvable. It's all a matter of applying the right tools. What happens if you're working on a problem that you've really got to solve and discover that no F is greater than R exists? You redefine the problem by relaxing the problem definition. For example, if NASA discovered they couldn't put a man on the moon in 10 years, they could have switched to 20 years. Or you can declare the problem unsolvable. But at least you know that, and you no longer have to waste time trying to solve an unsolvable problem. It's a powerful law. The fifth law says that difficult social problems have multiple root causes. Consider climate change. We know what we should do. We should get atmospheric CO2 down to below 350 parts per million. But we're not doing it, which is change resistance. That's actually the crux of the environmental sustainability problem, as this Thwink.org paper argued back in 2010. There it is, right there in the abstract. The problem must be decomposed into two sequential subproblems. Change resistance is the crux of the problem and must be solved first at the root cause level by striking at the root. But striking at the root is not where activism has focused. This is really unfortunate because it makes the problem impossible to solve. The sixth law states that mode change requires changing the system by re-engineering its dominant feedback loops. That's what we mean when we say the invention of modern democracy didn't change the ruler. It changed the system by adding the voter feedback loop. Feedback loops are the most powerful forces in the social universe. If you don't understand a problem's key feedback loops, then you don't understand the problem. These 6 laws are the analytical power behind social force diagrams. The laws let you cut through the mind-boggling complexity of social problems by focusing on what matters and ignoring the rest. For example, here's how another social problem could be analyzed. how many human lives could have been saved and how much suffering could have been avoided with the right tools. We can never change history. We can only learn from the past to change the future.
Exactly what does structuring one's analysis mean? The word analysis means separating a problem into its constituent elements. Doing so reduces complex issues to their simplest terms. Morgan Jones, former CIA analyst, author of The Thinker's Toolkit.
What's the best way to structure your analysis? That's a tough question. After 2 centuries of working on that question, the business world has the answer. The most effective way to structure your analysis is to create a problem-solving process. Let it drive everything you do and continuously improve the process until you astonish yourself by achieving far more than anyone thought possible. The impossible becomes the possible. Every successful large corporation in the world has, at its core, a collection of continuously improved processes that drive everything the company does. A process is a repeatable series of steps to accomplish a goal. Most of what you do follows a process, like making breakfast, driving to work, and doing your job. If you're seriously interested in continuous process improvement, there's a goldmine of educational material available. The question of what process to use arose early in Thwink.org's research. What process would we need to solve a global social problem like sustainability? After becoming familiar with the problem, we started with a simple process and continuously improved it as we analyzed the sustainability problem. The end result was the system improvement process. This is the third and most important component of the foundation of activism. Here's how it works. The process was designed to solve any difficult social problem whose solution would benefit the common good. The process integrates social force diagrams and the 6 laws into a single tool with 4 main steps. The key step is analysis. That's where social force diagrams and the 6 laws are implemented. After the overall problem is defined in problem definition, the next step is to decompose the one big problem into the right subproblems. We found that all difficult large-scale social problems have the same 3 subproblems. Without the right decomposition, the problem is unsolvable because you're trying to simultaneously solve 3 problems at the same time without realizing it. The human mind becomes distracted, confused, and overwhelmed by the problem's complexity. But that complexity can be tamed with the right subproblems. After the one big problem is decomposed into smaller problems, analysis begins. Here the main strategy is to realize that every difficult social problem has two layers, the superficial layer and the fundamental layer. The insights you gain from analysis of the superficial layer give you what you need to correctly dig down to the fundamental layer and find the only thing that really matters in a difficult problem, the root causes. After problem decomposition, the 5 sub-steps of analysis are applied to each subproblem. This is where you build social force diagrams and feedback loop models so you can first understand and then test how the system with the problem works. Once your analysis tests out okay, you're done with analysis and ready for the next step, solution convergence, and after that, implementation. The very best people in any field are always learning. They're always improving their tools and techniques until they're good enough to solve the problem. The system improvement process follows this proven path to success with continuous process improvement. The strategy is that once you have a formal process driving your work, any real problem can be solved by continuously improving the process until it becomes mature enough to solve the problem. Continuous improvement was the secret to eradicating smallpox, building the Panama Canal, putting a man on the moon in 10 years, and putting a computer in your pocket that's connected to over 1 billion people. Miracles of technology like this are impossible without process improvement being at the very core of your work. Let's take a look at an example of what's possible if you commit to continuous process improvement.
It's the most sophisticated manufacturing process in the world, and it's probably the most automated manufacturing process in the world. And so that in itself is challenging. We're always on the cutting edge. Our wafers are 12 inches in diameter, and we move 25 of them at a time in a box. And it just weighs too much for one person to do repetitive moves, so we had to automate it. When we talk about the vehicles, it's part of our AMHS system, our Automated Material Handling System. It's the transportation vehicle that picks up the product and delivers it to the process tool. It takes it from the process tool and delivers it to the next process tool. If the tool's not ready, it puts it in a storage unit. We keep track of the priority of what needs to move where first. We know where all the product is in the factory at any given time. In the old days, if our automation went down, it probably wasn't as important. The factory still ran. But today, if major parts of our automation system goes down, the factory stops. I think what excites me about what Intel does is the computing capabilities that we make possible that make people's lives better and more enriching.
If Intel can do it, so can we. The right process can make billions of people's lives better and more enriching by solving the unsolved problems, as well as by solving future problems. The engineers at Thwink.org have a vision. With the right starting process and continuous process improvement, modern activism will very quickly become able to solve any important social problem in the world, if the problem is solvable. That's a tall claim, but it relies on the same strategy that works so well for business. There is no law of physics preventing activists from doing tomorrow what businesses like Intel are doing today, if they use the right tools. The system improvement process is a form of root cause analysis designed to fit social problems. We had to develop the tool because there were no tools available that came close to fitting our needs. But this is the norm, because root cause analysis always has to be adapted to fit your type of problem. For example, NASA had to do the same thing. Take a look at this. NASA can't achieve mission success without root cause analysis, so they built their own root cause analysis tool. After extensive review, NASA found that none of the commercially available tools would fit their needs. NASA developed their tool to fit their own particular needs. Thwink.org has done the same by designing the system improvement process to fit the unique needs of analytical activists. Like NASA's tool, the system improvement process was designed with the whole system in mind. The process provides a step-by-step guide with standard diagrams, terms, and definitions, just like NASA's tool does. NASA's tool fits space exploration problems. The system improvement process fits social problems. There's one more thought. Every activist organization on the planet faces the same key question. Do we have enough information to prove that a proposed solution will probably work? It's called the solution question. Without something like the tools we've presented here, it's impossible to rationally answer that question. You can only guess. But with the right tools, you no longer have to guess. The reason you no longer have to guess is you now have the right tools and a standard vocabulary that lets you think and talk and analyze entirely differently. Compare that to the language activists use today. It's not just a new vocabulary, it's a whole new paradigm. Where will this take us? Well, we don't know exactly, but we do know that it will probably lead to problem-solving success, because that's exactly what's happened to every other field of science once it had its starting foundation.